Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome to this very important event. I'm Carlos Teixeira, the director of the PhD program at the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. I want to welcome the participants here in the room and those joining us online. Hi to everybody that is online. The Institute of Design started the first PhD in design in the United States 30 years ago, in 1994. Since then, ID has pioneered design research, practices, and education in design strategy, interaction design, and human-centered design, which are now common knowledge, professional practices, and curriculum adopted worldwide. Irem today will present the findings from her PhD research. As a tradition, PhD researchers are expected to share the original contribution they developed during their doctoral studies with society. It's a give back for all the support they received in the journey of developing new knowledge. It's time to pay back.
Yes.
Special thanks to Laura Forlano for your mentorship of Irem, and Ruth Smith and Matt Shapiro. Where's Ruth? Hello, Matt, thanks, for joining the advisory committee. I want to thank Fulbright in Turkey and ID donors for their generous scholarships to support Irem during her years of research. Scholarships are fundamental for attracting and nurturing the best talent in the world to work on the biggest challenge of our time. Our future depends on them and their work. No pressure. Speaking about our future, Irem will present a care-informed framework for future making, advocating for care ethics in design to shift focus from short-term tech-driven goals to sustainable, care-centered futures. Irem's contributions are timely when so much is at stake about our future. She will talk for about 45 minutes, and we will have 10 minutes at the end for question and answers with Irem. Thank you very much. All yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos. Just wanted to check if everyone can hear me okay with the microphone. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Carlos, for your introduction. It's such a privilege to be here, to be sharing the culmination of my work. But this is not just my work, but the shared work, and as Azra put it, shared wisdom of my committee members, the faculty, my friends, and their collaborators, other PhD colleagues, and all the people that I learned the fundamentals of care, including my family and my parents. So I want to thank you and share my gratitude for being here and supporting me on this journey. So as Carlos mentioned, this research is exploring how integrating care ethics into future-oriented design can help organizations envision futures that go beyond the short-term, tech-centric goals. And I conducted an ethnographic study in a multinational corporation, and I argue that unlike our conceptions about technology companies, care can still be found in all of these places, but we need to really focus on cultivating the existing care capacity in these contexts. So building on my findings from ethnographic research, I propose a framework to help practitioners cultivate care in the organizations and to make change from within. So I was thinking about how to visualize my PhD journey. So I've been here for a long time, and I feel like it's time to move out of the nest. And I was really privileged to be able to enter here as a designer, a traditionally trained product designer, to become a researcher, a teacher, and also having these research experiences both in academia and outside. So I was thinking about the parallel lines that ran through my PhD research, But then it's not really parallel lines. It's more like a ball of yarn with like these kind of interconnections and sometimes very lucky mistakes or just like random connections with people that really fostered and nurtured my growth. So I really, really appreciate that. So with that.
Sorry, people online is not checking.
Oh, okay. Maybe. Is it better now or? Like here? I'm ashamed to be a designer in these cases. Thank you. Okay, so my research starts with the premise that there is not one single future, but there are multiple futures. And this has been explored in both in design and fields like future studies, science and technology studies. But because I'm focusing on design in a technology context, I'm focusing on how emerging technologies are fueling our collective imagination about futures that do not yet exist. These collective visions of desirable futures are not just illustrations of what might happen, but once they gain mass and solidity, they actually inform the actions that are being taken in the present, and they inform technological trajectories. So socio-technical imaginaries, as defined by Jasanoff and Kim, are these collective institutionalized visions of desirable futures shaped by shared understandings of social life, social order, and technological advancements. And in a world filled with uncertainty, such visions are influencing decision-making in the present, even if they're speculative. So they're mobilizing resources, they're informing funding decisions, they're informing national policies. So they are actually performative. So they contribute to establishing some technological trajectories. So it matters what futures that we imagine. And some of these futures, these visions, especially the modernist ones that are only focusing on technoscientific progress, can also destroy habitats, communities, peoples, and also other futures that do not yet exist. So they are foreclosing possibilities of other futures to flourish. So anthropologist Deborah Rose calls this the double death of futures. And in this era of increasing uncertainty, precariousness, and violence and vulnerability, our current condition is defined by this shared risk that are exposing humankind to this condition of vulnerability. Of course, this is not distributed equally, but with the recent events, as also Azra mentioned earlier in the day, this notion that there will be no future is becoming the dominant vision. So some scholars and also practitioners are attributing this crisis to a lack of care in our, to a widespread crisis of care. So there is this rich body of work that is gaining more momentum that looks into policy, economy, democracy, and healthcare that really identifies this crisis of care as the fundamental reason for these precariousness. So this might portray a bleak picture, but then also I find a lot of hope in science and technology studies, especially feminist techno-science. And as Anna Singh reminds us, in a global state of precarity, we don't have other choices than looking for life in this ruin. And this recognizing our shared vulnerability as a condition could help us to build an ethical foundation from these like messy, patchy present that is not purely dystopia, neither a utopia. So how do we counter precariousness? At the same time, there is this growing interest in care ethics, almost as kind of like a rediscovery of care ethics. Care ethics in itself is not new, so it was formulated by a group of feminist philosophers in the 1980s, but it holds very true in the present day as well. So care is not only a value or not just like a feel-good feeling, but it's a practice, and it's an act of doing. So Bernice Fisher and John Toronto define care as everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so we can live in it as well as possible. And that world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. So more recently, scholars like Maria Puig de la Bella Casa are extending care beyond it being a species activity only for humans to include more than human worlds, to really reframe care ethics as an ethic of possibility, to think about different ways that we can explore living as well as possible, including this and others. This might be future generations or non-humans. And these kind of discussions are already happening in design as well. So this also has a long history of examining the role of design and its complicity in defuturing. So Tony Fry has coined this term, defuturing, which means the negation of world's futures through design. And critiques of design has argued that the narrow, short-term, human-centric focus was responsible for fueling consumerism and unsustainable practices, which all contributed to some of the crises that we are living now. And along with these critiques, there have been shifts that are also reframing design beyond its current disciplinary boundaries. So the first one is the expansion of the scope of design. So increasingly, practitioners and scholars are arguing that design could be reframed as a way for addressing large-scale societal challenges like climate change, public policy, healthcare, and urban mobility. The second expansion is about the things. So we don't think about these objects as isolated, self-contained entities, but we are thinking about things as gatherings, these fluid and dynamic assemblages that contain multiple relationships and multiple actors. And finally, the expansion beyond the human. A recent work in posthumanism and design and more than human and design have really explored and sought to decenter the human in design and also in making futures. So with this expansion and with the recognition of design in precariousness, this puts a lot more maybe weight on the shoulder of designers, but also it's also opening up possibilities for thinking about design as a future-making practice that makes other futures, which Arturo Escobar calls futurality. And as future makers, as design moves beyond the individual user to society to complex web of life, and as it shifts its gaze from near future to long-term future, designers could really start crafting alternative futures, not only for humans of today, but non-humans and next generation. And this requires design, making ethics integral to design to really think about our responsibility and accountability for the futures that we create. So in order to address precariousness, we need to cultivate care through design for future making. And this is the central premise of my research. And the main question that I'm asking through this research and trying to answer is that how can we make futures with care through design? So, and some of the sub-questions I have are what future-oriented design practices are emerging in technology organizations, and what are the possibilities for cultivating care to counter dominant imaginaries? So in order to start addressing that question, I draw on body of work from different disciplinary domains, and I have to have a call out here to show who's at my table, who I want to invite to my table. So I have design, future studies, science and technology studies, and feminist technoscience and organizational studies. And this table was handed to me by Jessica Meharry, who who passed it on to me. And I found it really helpful to think about like who I want to be at a table with, who I want to kind of bring to the table, or who I want to start a conversation with. So with that, to start addressing some of these questions, I conducted mainly organizational ethnography to investigate future-oriented design practices and also identifying possibilities for cultivating care in professional design practice. So I conducted my fieldwork at the R&D center of a multinational corporation, which was founded in Japan, but now has global presence. And I will call this company Unity Tech, and I will also refer to the projects, the people, and all the sensitive information with pseudonyms to maintain anonymity. So while I was conducting this study, I was very privileged to also be a design intern when I started. So that gave me a very good opportunity to be really immersed in day-to-day practices, and also to foster relationships with my peers, colleagues, and mentors, which was really, really helpful to be more reflexive in how I'm thinking about the research questions and to continually reflect on some of the assumptions that I had about professional design practice. So I was part of the, so Unity Tech is a large global multinational corporation, and I was part of the R&D center of the North American subsidiary. And the R&D center has several labs, such as Industrial IoT lab or Big Data lab, and also there is the design lab. So when I was working there, I conducted participant observations. So participant observation is an ethnographic research method where the researcher is also participating in the practices. I also conducted qualitative interviews with the employees, including R&D researchers and managers, also document analysis to triangulate the data to have a better understanding of what are some of the discourses on the higher corporate level, and what are the practices at the ground level. I also conducted a participatory workshop for an internal group to test out some future thinking practices. The second part of my methodology really draws on practice-based research and practice-related theories. And this also came from my fieldwork. As I was practicing, I'm comfortable with design tools and methods, techniques, but when I was immersed in the field side, I really started realizing that it's really difficult to separate a practitioner from the practice. And the popularity of step-by-step design tools really kind of create that separation. But on the field side, I found that those situated partial perspectives were really fundamental in the kinds of futures that we are making. So I'm drawing on Lucy Kimball's definition of design as practice, which is habitual, possibly rule-governed, often shared, routinized, conscious or unconscious actions that are embodied and situated. So practices are at the micro level, so they are everyday interactions and actions, but they're also very helpful to think about the larger scale phenomena. So adopting a practice-based angle really helped me to think about these socio-technical imaginaries that are happening at the societal level, but also draw connections to how researchers and practitioners think when they engage with futures. So during the time of this study, there were major organizational shifts that informed design practices. So I find it very helpful to situate this in the broader context of science and technology and innovation policies, and also what's been happening in within the organization. So I will primarily talk about mission-oriented innovation policies as they are the most relevant. But usually, there are these two very dominant framings of science, technology, and innovation policy that focus on fixing market failures and promoting economic growth, or increasing competitiveness through strengthening innovation systems. And more recently, mission-oriented innovation policies have been gaining increasing traction globally, and this is especially true in some regions that might be dealing with some specific societal challenges, such as aging population in Northeastern Asian countries. So mission orientation really differ from previous framings by bringing the social and societal challenges to the center of innovation efforts. And this example is very interesting to highlight how socio-technical imaginaries are being used to animate these policies. So in these mission-oriented mission-oriented innovation policies, they're usually very ambitious, very broad in scope. They require stakeholder collaboration across institutional, organizational, and disciplinary boundaries. So there is often what is termed a directionality failure. And these visions help align stakeholders or create a shared understanding of what a desirable future might look like. But again, these are kind of self-reinforcing visions in some cases. In this case, Society 5.0 was proposed by the Cabinet Office in Japan in 2016 as part of their Science, Technology, and Innovation Basic Plan. And it's positioned as this direct evolution from information society. And it's defined as this human-centered society that balances technological advancements and economic and value with human well-being. And it's positioned as this very seamless future where cyberspace, physical space merge at all areas of the life. Excuse me. And in line with mission orientation, at the policy level, there is also increasing attention to corporate social innovation. So things like double bottom line or triple bottom line that are proposing that businesses should create social and environmental value in addition to economic value in itself are not new. But these were seen as the domain of corporate social responsibility or as these philanthropic endeavors that weren't really the center of innovation. So they were thought as add-ons. But in the corporate context, corporate social innovation refers to the aim to create value for shareholders and stakeholders and to really bring in societal challenges as the main problem to address through technology. And corporate actors are pretty significant in reproducing and strengthening these social-technical imaginaries because they're also trying to claim a stake in the future that's being promised. And they do these through their own mission statements or reports, but in some cases, there are also critical approaches that are emerging. So with that, here I will start talking about my findings from the field side, and based on the data that I collected, there are 3 organizational shifts that are really shaping future-oriented design practices or future-making practices in general. So the first one is the shift from technical innovation to social innovation and the adoption of corporate social innovation as a core strategy. So this was, at Unity Tech, this is not only due to trying to have increasing alignment with mission-oriented innovation policies, but also to respond to some business challenges that they're facing. The second one is the near R&D to R&D plus. In traditional technology corporations, research is done in a very typical way, and where you have the R&D at the core of the organization, which have like cutting-edge research, and then they publish a paper, then find the right fit. But Unity Tech has been reversing that to start with co-creation and to really adopt that into their practices. And then finally, the shift from products to solutions, as Unity Tech is trying to reposition itself as a partner or a leader for social innovation. They're also changing their offerings from disparate products to solutions that are adaptable and could answer to societal needs in the long term. So I will skip these because I'm already a little behind. And while the mission-oriented transformation at Unity Tech could offer new pathways for engaging with future-oriented design, this is also raising critical questions about how the future itself is conceptualized within the corporate context. So at Unity Tech, like many other technology organizations, the future is seen as a transactional commodity. So it could be shared or owned or exchanged if you have the right technology. And companies like this often reproduce dominant imaginaries through corporate visions. And so But then, as I mentioned, there are also critical approaches that are opening up spaces for imagining different alternative futures. So I'm mapping these different visions and different modes of future making at Unity Tech on two axes. So whether they entrench or challenge dominant vision on the vertical axis, or whether they are instrumental or substantive. So I'm drawing on a few vignettes in my doctoral research, but I'll be sharing only two of them. So on the lower left quadrant, we have two vignettes which are capturing the future with data and animating society 5.0. And on the right-hand side, we have disaster 5.0, which is a direct play with the Society 5.0 and a project from the Unity Tech, the design lab that I was part of, called Vital City, which I will be talking about in a minute. So cities are seen as playgrounds for embedding technological solutions. So they are often the core topic for these future visions. And it's also a core area for Unity Tech. So smart city related materials outline how IoT or video surveillance data analytics might make cities safer and smarter in enhancing public safety, transportation, and traffic issues. So some of these solutions were featured in a 2021 event, which was open to the public, really focusing on the company's solutions. And what was really striking for me was the opening video for the event, which was this video of drone shots of big cities or industrial agricultural farms, which was really devoid of humans, and it was really at this 30,000 feet level. And then there was this disembodied voice that was reading almost like a poem, which was very different from what we heard this morning. And the first line was that the future belongs to the data-driven. And then this really embodies, this really materializes how the future is seen through this technoscientific lens. And on the other side, I want to talk about this project by the design team that was made in 2020. And by the way, I need to acknowledge that these are AI-generated images that I'm using as placeholders to kind of represent the images that I observed. But this alternative imaginary of Vital City was part of the project that the design team did based on smart city. So the idea was the same, it's again, smart city, but the output of that project was a mural that had a utopian vision for a smart city and a dystopian vision. And the near identical layout made those contrasts very, very stark. The dystopian future showed dilapidated city infrastructure, video surveillance, heavily armed police, and signs of widening inequality with a backdrop of polluted sky. The sky was littered with advertisement and delivery drones. And there were also some Easter eggs, like a young person wearing anti-surveillance makeup in the foreground, which has been on the team's radar since 2018 as an emerging social practice of resistance. On the other hand, the utopian future showed a very different city, neighborhoods with circular planning instead of unrestrained urban sprawl, public transportation instead of highways, vast swaths of natural undeveloped land, and clear blue skies. And aside from a few robot assistants, it wasn't futuristic at all. And it was a topic of conversation that the dystopia reminded everyone of the present condition. So the team really wanted to ask, how do we go beyond smart? Because smart may not always mean life-sustaining. So by reframing smart city as a vital city, the team really emphasized livable futures. So this example I find interesting because it's taking the current visions of smart city, but it's proposing an alternative, something that we should aspire to. So as explained, showcased by this example, design team is pushing against dominating visions and developing methods and tools to create counter-imaginaries to really ask critical questions that might sometimes go unasked in a technology company. With that, I also, during my time, I also found that is becoming a competence for design lab, which is kind of reflect shift in towards mission and creating long-term futures. So these practices were formalized under what I will call prospection, the flagship project by the design team, especially the social science researchers. So one of the goals with prospection was to try to bridge the gap between the goals of social innovation and the actual practice. Especially, this was very critical for establishing trust with companies and stakeholders, some other customers, because it was, thank you, because it was seen as very critical for building that type of dialogue to show that they could be good partners for large-scale challenges. So building on the growing importance of futures thinking and future-oriented design within the design team, I developed 3 case studies to really capture these practices. So I'm structuring my findings across these 3 case studies. The first one is focusing on making new normal futures. The second one is on building futures literacy, and the third one is new forms of organizing. So these are kind of like circuits of practice that are enhancing and kind of building on each other. The first case study is focusing on the evolution of prospection and how it provided the foundation for building reflexive capacity for making what I argue care-informed futures. In this case study, I will not go in too much detail, but I analyzed 2 critical steps that really marked the evolution of the project. The first one was the introduction of what is called dark cards, which was introduced in 2019. These dark cards focusing on climate apocalypse, widening inequality, and weaponized data really sought to bring precariousness to the fore and to kind of challenge these techno-optimistic futures. The second key step was prospection for the new normal from 2021. So it was exploring post-pandemic futures, and it was formulated as a workbook to change the engagement model with this body of work. And it was aiming to help internal stakeholders build futures thinking as this capacity, which the team believed was a foundation to build successful dialogue with their customers. And as the name suggests, the precariousness was a central theme. It was a cross-cutting theme across all categories. Yet there were also futures that depicted forms of care. For example, one story was about resilient coalitions that foster mutual aid. These were inspired by not only noticing precariousness that's around the team, but also emerging forms of care that was on their radar. And these stories were not utopian or dystopian, but they were patchy and messy as our present. So this, being part of this team and collecting data through immersion really helped me to understand like how these practices are really situated and very, very partial to practitioners' own perspectives and own positionalities. So there is something that resists translation and packaging in future-making practices. And while prospection really helped ask these critical questions, integrating them into broader organizational practices remained a challenge. And in the following case studies, I'll start talking about these a little bit more in detail. And these are some of the practices that go into prospection, starting with sign collection, clustering and synthesis, crafting future stories, illustrating life words, and also developing these exercises to help others. So the second case study focuses on building futures literacy through prospection workshops. So in my dissertation, I primarily focus on a workshop that I conducted for this internal research group. And I experimented with infrastructural speculations and bringing in artifacts from the future to really go beyond that solution-centric mindset that is very much focused on the short term. So futures literacy is seen as a skill set that allows individuals to interpret, anticipate, and engage with future possibilities in meaningful ways. And while these workshops helped build futures literacy, there were some organizational barriers that really prevented these practices from flourishing. So while the feedback from the participants were overall very positive, they found very empowered by the creativity that they got to experience and just like getting out of their day-to-day short-term thinking. They also said that it's too unrealistic to do at Unity Tech, or that some of the organizational structures are really narrowing the scope of the long-term futures. And the final case study is on new forms of organizing. So the previous one was about translating the practices that are conducted within the team to another organizational unit to really start building that capacity. And the third one is more about packaging these practices so they could be used in fostering collaborations with different organizational units. So visions were seen as key to really align these stakeholders internally. So one thing that's been really promoted within Unity Tech was this idea of cross-cutting collaboration across silos. And the company is also promoting open innovation and co-creating the future. But in organizations that have very silos that are really well established and these practices that are really entrenched, it's really hard to go across those silos even internally. So vision building activities and those kind of practices were seen as a way to align different stakeholders around shared goals and to mobilize action, and also to present a unified front very practically. And so design team experimented with different kind of collaboration models, and I was part of some of these projects. But although they helped to create these visions that are long-term and that were visions that everyone could get on board with, it was still very difficult to take the next step. So in this case study, I examined a few reasons, but the first one is that even internally, there's a lot of friction and a lot of sometimes competition for funding, or also these kind of vision building activities or future-oriented design practices are seen as incompatible to their own frameworks. So the design team, after experimenting with some collaborations, they started kind of prototyping new models of organizing to foster horizontal alliances or ad hoc alliances that were really brought together to cut across these silos that were not really having a home in a very hierarchical organizational structure. And with that, building on these findings from my case studies, I developed a framework for care-informed future making. So my main goal with this, with kind of bringing everything together to propose a framework that could be actionable for design practitioners working in these kind of large organizational settings, was to really start by understanding how practices are connected to one another, how they're disconnected from one another, and also to see how they're responding to some of these large-scale challenges. Because no practice is happening in a vacuum. They're always interconnected to other practices at organizational levels, and they're informed by a lot of different influences, such as mission-oriented innovation policies or societal visions of technological change. And while I spend most of my time being immersed in the design team, so this is where a lot of my data and observational data, especially about practices, come from, I'm finding these practices to be very helpful to understand some of the larger phenomena that's happening on the higher organizational levels. So this framework is drawing on concepts from practice theory. So again, future visions are made through these practices. And tracing and mapping these practices could help understand where these visions are coming from and how are they becoming solidified, who's challenging them or who's entrenching them. I keep doing this. And I also find that while corporate foresight is traditionally within the bounds of a specific unit, future making is all across, could be found all across organizational levels. So it could be about like how we think about like a next product, or it could be about like 50 years out, but these are all manifestations of future making. So I will just describe the framework before I forget. So as I said, I'm drawing on practice theory. And in practice theory, everything is made up of practices. But I also found the organizational levels that are proposed by Chesbrough to explain open innovation very helpful, because it's kind of providing a backdrop to understand how these practices accumulate to shape changes in the, for example, at the firm level. And I also find it empowering because while it might be challenging for design practitioners to go against institutional norms, they can change their practices, or this is kind of allowing them to see how their practices might have cascading effects. So in the framework, I have the organization levels from micro, which is team, all the way to society. And so society and ecosystem are the extra organizational levels that are outside the firm boundaries. And then I have firm, functional area, project, and team levels that are within the organizational boundaries. And I'm primarily mapping practices and practice networks, which are kind of these kind of small bundles of interconnected practices, but also influences that are shaping those and also their effects. And then I started mapping my case studies on this framework to test it out and also to use it as an analytical tool to synthesize some of my findings. So I have on the left-hand side, I have the first case study, which is focusing on prospection. The blue area on the right-hand side and functional area is about building futures literacy. And then the other one is new models of organizing. So by mapping this, I can start identifying what are some of the influences from the societal level that are shaping those. For example, mission orientation, business challenges, and societal challenges are really shaping these kind of orientation and commitment to social innovation at the firm level, which is then in turn shaping this shared goal of co-creation at R&D, which is the functional area. And through this mapping, I'm also able to see how some practices are being translated into other areas or how they're being packaged to be transported to be used in different areas. So the main goal that I want to achieve with this framework is to really identify possibilities of care. So through the empirical work, I find that care-informed practices are emerging at the organizational boundaries. But my hope is that this tool could be a useful tool for design practitioners to really identify how we, through what practices we are addressing precariousness, through what practices we are integrating care, and to really build from there, because these kind of large-scale challenges are not going to be solved overnight, or also organizational strategies are also not going to be changed overnight. So it's really important that we start from our own position of if we want to define design as change makers, we really need to start from integrating care to shape futures from within. So these are just some of the details, but I will just go over the synthesis of the findings based on this framework. So the first one is organizational units focus on different time horizons, which is leading to tensions between visions with a capital V that are long-term and visions with a lowercase v, which are usually limited to the either product life cycle or project life cycle. The second one is rigid organizational silos are blocking cross-functional collaboration, limiting the integration of future-oriented design practices. Third one is future-oriented design as a highly technical form of knowledge work could inform new modes of organizing, as explained in the third case study. And these organizings could help foster these horizontal alliances around shared issues. And the fourth one, which is really critical for me, is that while care is pervasive in corporate messaging, care-informed practices are found in organizational margins, and there is a big gap between the two of them. It is challenging to move beyond caring about and to really integrate care into broader textual organizational practices. So how am I doing on time? How much over time am I? Oh, good. Thank you. And with that, I also want to offer some tactics or some questions for cultivating care to accompany this framework. So care cannot be rule-based, so it's really context-dependent. So I wanted to offer some questions for to help practitioners to identify possibilities of care, or also some challenges for cultivating that. So I'm drawing on John Tronto's phases of care. So there were initially 4 phases, which is caring about, caring for, caregiving, and care receiving. And she more recently added a 5th one, which is really critical for building futures together, which is caring with. So caring for really emphasizes responsibility. Caring about is, I deleted that, but I remember what it's about. So caring is about attentiveness and really recognizing vulnerability and the need that's emerging. But usually that is the easy part, but going beyond caring about is very challenging. So we can identify societal issues, but how do we assume responsibility for it? So the second phase, caring for, really focuses on assuming responsibility. Who is responsible to respond to precariousness, and how do we assume responsibility? The next stage is caregiving, which requires competence to actually perform the act of caring. So what competences already exist within the organization? How do we assess competence? Like, how do we know if care was successful, or was it a good form of care? The next stage is responsiveness. How do we respond to the care that is given? So this reminds me of Haraway's idea of responsibility. How do we kind of build that connection with the recipient of care? And how could practices adapt to be more responsive to changing vulnerabilities in a very dynamic landscape? And finally, caring with. What are the alliances designers can establish and foster across organizational levels that also go beyond firm boundaries? Because there are a lot of collectives and that are already living in the future, as Mariam Haydaropour's thesis stated, and also Azra today mentioned that there are all these organizations that are already building care to the front and center, but how do we kind of empower and platform them instead of getting stuck in the care washing discourses? So this research is really trying to kind of help designers to assume this role of ethical agents and change makers from within. So designers are known to be boundary spanners, and this is what I also found in my research. And the framework could serve as a practical tool to allow designers to strategically navigate and influence corporate practices by cultivating care from within. So I will just go over the summary of contributions really quickly. So the first contribution that I'm hoping to make is to help designers explore care-centric futures and engage with these ideas, these concepts around care. The second one is to really prioritize cultivating care in future-making practices and to offer some practical tools to do that. Finally, empirical evidence of corporate future-making practices are very limited, so I'm hoping to contribute to bridging some of that gap by tracing and documenting these practices. So as a final kind of vignette to go back to the idea of care and the shift in design, so this is one vignette that I shared in a paper with Laura in DRS, but I'm focusing on this idea of a native garden, which really became influential about how I think about care. So during my fieldwork, my relationship with one of my coworkers really evolved into a deep friendship and mentorship. And we often shared about our frustrations about design and care washing, futures washing. And in November 2022, I visited her in her Southern California home to help establish, help break the ground for this native garden that she'd been planning. So we planted native species like sage, mallow, and deergrass, and I also learned about how big they would get, what's their life cycle like. We also made some makeshift shacks for the critters. And after that, I attended a conference in Arizona, and part of the conference was this field visit to Biosphere 2 in the Sonoran Desert. So this was also a utopian vision, a beacon of utopian vision of space travel and space exploration, and also to really expand our understanding about how ecosystems work. But it was a very interesting experience to be in this eerily natural feeling space, to feel the tide and the breeze, but to be enclosed by this glass and metal structure. So this was a really high contrast with the native garden. So this is really exemplifying this modernist ambitions of controlling ecosystems and to really designing them from outside without really paying enough attention to maintenance and care and the labor of those that goes into the flourishing of these systems. And on the other hand, native garden was a very small-scale experiment about what the future of design itself could be like. My friend frequently sent me updates about the garden. Some plants seemed dead, but they were growing strong roots. Some critters had already moved into these makeshift shacks, and I marveled at how vibrant everything looked and grew at their own pace, one leaf, one root, and one shoot at a time. So it became this kind of staple in our conversations, a metaphor about what design could be, shifting from controlling and orchestrating systems from outside to caring for interdependencies and vulnerabilities from within, so we can live in our world as well as possible. So I also want to just end with showing this quote from Arturo Escobar that really kind of ties in with the native garden. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Irem, for a great presentation. And as I said, giving back to society and giving back to everyone the work that you have done and now the work that we can use. I'm going to open for questions and comments, observations. We have microphones because we have people online. So it will be important that I circulate the microphone or you can pick some of those. Anyone want to start?
I'll always start. I guess I have one, but thank you, Irem. I'm curious, I think I think people who saw Azra's presentation in the morning and now yours, obviously there's some real connections, and specifically this concept of socio-technical imaginary. So I'm just curious if you can say a little bit more about why you think that's such a rich concept that attracted both of you in projects that kind of ended up being pretty different.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it was probably simultaneously coming across the concept from different angles. For me, it was very, very helpful because it's not only focusing on these social technical imaginaries as abstract concepts, but how they became stabilized. Because I was immersed in that corporate context, I could see that those like imaginaries being reproduced or challenged through practices. So that aspect of social technical imaginaries being the output of material discursive practices, what really resonated well with me. I think it's a rich concept. It's also a tricky one because I think it has some explanatory power, but then there are also all these other concepts like from sociology of expectations or Jen Specker's work on promissory capitalism that really focus on expectation work. But I found that that kind of the accounting for the practices and the making of social technical imaginary is helpful for my case. And in terms of like how we kind of approach it from two different angles, I think it's, it's very interesting because Azra's work is really opening up those tensions and really holding space for those kind of conflicts and to emerge for different ways of knowing. And I think in my case, there is already such a strong current of technological progress, even having some shared visions of slightly different futures are really critical for challenging those imaginaries. So my work is more about like how do we use these care-informed futures for aligning towards better, more livable futures. So it's that kind of difference of like the context that I think helped, like made us move in two different streams.
Anybody else? Wesley. For the committee, I will hold more to the end, and you can make comments and observations.
Hi, Irem. Thank you so much. Lovely presentation, summary of your work. So it strikes me that when we talk about care, we're also talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainability, kind of all of these concepts that are not the traditional domain of business and corporate entities, right? Who historically, at least for the last century and a half, have been focused on providing value to their shareholders. And I think one of the things that you find and demonstrate in your work is that these practices of care are happening in niches, and you call it at the margins within the organization. And I am curious, in your work, kind of looking back at what you've done and what you might do in the future, is this the space that we should be focusing? And, are there bright spots, and what might be ways of encouraging bright spots within an organizational setting to help private organizations grapple with these bigger picture issues, right? So it's not just about shareholder value, but kind of more comment and question. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. How do designers help organizations to grapple with these challenges? And are there ways of moving these things beyond the margins, beyond the niches, and can design have a role in that?
That's a great question that I've been grappling with for a long time. I think one thing that was encouraging for me was to see all these kind of care-informed futures that are being produced that counter, that go against the organizational norms. So I think there is that kind of active resistance and dissenting within the organization that's very valuable. But like, how do we amplify that? I think I have that in the limitations of the framework. There at least needs to be, even if it's care washing, there needs to be at least some level of commitment to promoting other goals and values that go beyond the economic value. I think, it's not really like the two different worlds. Like caring comes from very relational feminist ethics, and I think there's a lot of care-informed collectives that are doing that really well, that are beyond these kind of corporate sphere. But then I also find that this increasing orientation towards social innovation at the national level could really help promote that, and to making up strategies at a higher level to open up more spaces for these care-informed futures to flourish. I think as much as we like to criticize human-centered design, I think it equips designers with this basic understanding of being advocates for the users. And I think that's a really good, sometimes limited and narrow-scoped starting point, but I also find that to be useful. Like there was one instance from a document that this team that's focusing on futures design and visions within R&D, again, it's a design team. I was saying that, when we first encountered Society 5.0, we really felt like that we needed to do something about it, and we were the people to do it, like to really twist that encounter. So I find it very interesting how designers assume that role of user advocates, not even user advocates, but advocates of what's being neglected in a technology company, because sometimes their practices are sidelined. So I think there's that dynamic of being an outsider in a very tech-heavy organization. But I think I don't have the concrete answer to like how to really scale that, because it's also resisting scaling up because it's so situated and relational. But I think those kind of larger policy changes are at least putting these societal challenges on companies' radars. Like I think in some regions, I recently saw one company, like a large conglomerate in Korea, that was really promoting social innovation, not as corporate social responsibility, but to really create business out of it. And this was the case for Unity Tech too. So I think we might start seeing some of those initiatives flourishing. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I know we've been having a lot of conversations around this. And part of the stuff that we talked about was like, what are the conditions that need to be there for this to be happening? And I think a lot of us are observing around us that like people are getting hired, fired, and like in companies, we are constantly, like a lot of people are living in this constant state of fear without a feeling of security, where care might not feel like a priority. And at the same time, I'm seeing in like a lot of the stories that I hear from friends in their companies where like there is perhaps less of a commitment to existing programs and initiatives that are being started. And as soon as the economy changes directions, sometimes it feels like a toddler playing with building blocks that like companies being like, okay, now we're taking this program down, now we're gonna put something else in between. It's just like very dynamic, not in a good way at all times. And your metaphor of a native garden really made me think like how practices might be a way for these ideas to take root in the smallest cracks so that they cannot just be ripped out, and even if you rip something out, maybe something else grows from there. And I don't know, what do you think about like practice, the contribution of a practice-based approach to kind of resist these dynamics and corporations that might push care-driven practices to the margins?
That's a great question. I think some of the, and I agree, I think it's like a matter of finding cracks and openings and to just like start filling in those little, like wedging yourself in there. Some of the things that I've seen at Unity Tech were these kind of Easter eggs or tongue-in-cheek representations that seem very, very soft and very like happy-go-lucky on the surface, but at the undercurrent there is the real critique of technology. So I think there is that kind of sneakiness and tricky design, and I think Jessica and I were talking about that too. Like, how do you actually kind of do that in a playful way that's not necessarily to be vanilla about it, but to kind of catch that, kind of go undercover for a bit until you can have some stronger roots to flourish. I think that's, again, a question of precariousness or maybe even precarity of the design workforce, because designers, you know, it was all about like designers finally have a seat at the table, they're at sea level, but then with the increasing changes in the field, I think it's becoming, designers are becoming more and more precarious, and oftentimes they don't have a lot of power to change those influences. And that was something that I observed at Unity Tech as well. So part of the influence for having new models of organizing was the sudden explosion of designer workforce. So the R&D had to really formulate its own specialty to really settle in future-oriented design as this skill. I think, yeah, like sneakiness and tricky design, those are definitely some of the things that I would like to explore more. But it's just, I don't know, with the recent events and everything, it's just like such sudden change that however strong roots you might have, you could still be plucked.
I will make a comment and then allow other people to say. If you can go to the framework. I just want to mention that recently I was in Tokyo, Japan, 2 weeks ago. And for me, it was very interesting to see the transformation from my experience 15 years ago, when the first time that I went to Tokyo. And related to that question about the organizations, about the practice, I personally saw, and this is very anecdotal, very ground level, but what I saw was a big transformation between 15 years ago. You will go to Japan, you want to find design, you have to go inside the big corporations into the big design departments. That where design was happening. Very close, very hierarchical, very departmental, and functioning for all aspects of design for that corporation, very much aligned with the R&D and the technologies and the development of innovation. What I was surprised this time, among many things, was to find an environment where most of the places that I visit, they were open innovation spaces. They were collaborative spaces for multiple organizations to come together. These were sponsored by large organizations, but they wanted to be in that space. The reason I was looking for the diagram here is because they wanted, can we, the previous? They wanted to be here. So they were building spaces where, for them to be able to be more mission-oriented, they needed to be in that space. And why they wanted to be mission-oriented? Not because they're just good, it's just because there is a lot of policies at the government level that are giving the incentives and prioritizing many sectors and many missions. So this notion of having at the societal level policy making dictating certain new directions in investments, dictating new directions, and then corporations chasing after those incentives make them open up and collaborate and intersect in a space where needed a lot of collaboration. So I found this fascinating, and I'm just putting here recent anecdotal experience that I had that for me is also illustrative from a period where that, what I want to put in context is for me the work that Irem is doing as well as Azra was presenting today in the morning, is that this work started 6 years ago. And this is before the pandemic, this is before AI, and this illustrate a work that we were looking for something that may be at this time care and future-oriented, mission-oriented was something kind of utopian or aspirational. And then in the arc of the research, you suddenly see that those things become a priority. So I think that timing is very interesting, especially in the PhD. You usually start with something that doesn't exist yet, or it's not there yet. And most of the people are going to be doubting your beliefs of the work that you're doing because don't see any value because the context is not there. But it's interesting that by the time that you are finishing, the conditions that you were predicting, they start to emerge. So it's a great wave to catch for the two of you because it's the moment where you have been thinking about that for a long time. And suddenly the context is there demanding answers, expecting answers for those things. And you have them because you have been thinking them for a long, long time. That's what I mentioned in that experience in Japan, because it was a surprise to see like, oh, wow, this is here. Completely different from everything that I experienced before. And this is the same context where Irem was operating in Japan, that understanding the changes, not the changes, but understanding the demands for care, cultivating care in large organizations. Throwing back to everybody here for other comments, questions. Yuroko, you want to say something? No? Okay. Matt, do you want to make some comments? Observations?
Yeah, Irem, I thought this was really interesting. I mean, I do have a question, not a comment. Okay. I guess what I'm wondering about more is opportunities for there to be collaborations across institutions. So firm-based, you know, when you talked about mission-oriented approaches, the first thing that jumped out at me was the classic VLSI semiconductor program. And I think that's like the first mission-oriented program anywhere in the world. Like it represents the first case of a mission-oriented program. And one of the things about it was that it was trying to create bridges across firms. So I know that you are looking at a single case, but is there an opportunity to scale this up to multiple firms? I'm not sure if this is even really a relevant question, but it just, you know, it's just something that came to my mind.
No, I think it's very, very interesting and very highly relevant because I think the core tenet of that mission orientation is the collaboration and co-creation. I think because I was within the single firm and due to my position as an intern and also like being within R&D, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of that inter-institutional conditions, but I think it's definitely very interesting to think about like how do future visions play a role when you bring together very different stakeholders that don't really share institutional boundaries. And I think this research, for me, it was very interesting to observe that when there is a promotion of co-creation, open innovation, even within the boundaries, is very challenging. So I assume some insights could be transferable and maybe possible to scale up. And I think that would be a very interesting question and a matter of finding a good field site to do that kind of work. But I think laboratories or these kind of research networks, I think those would be highly critical for really putting mission orientation into motion. Yeah, so thanks for the question.
And I hope more organizations will open their doors for designers, not only to be practitioners working in the organization, but also researchers, being able to extract knowledge, new knowledge, and share broadly rather than just keeping internally. So great question. Ruth and Laura, should we close and go to the meeting? Do you want to have final comments here, or are we good? Up to you. Okay, so make a.
Hello, yeah. Okay, yeah, no, I think another example of like how we can integrate, theories and ideas that are coming from social sciences, humanities, that provide an entry point into, new orientation to design futures. Really it has, I think, co-evolved. So as Carlos said, the field site kind of co-evolved with these also conversations and makes for a very interesting intervention. And I think there's a lot of evidence in Irem's dissertation about the way that also we can use multiple voices and multiple writing styles in a dissertation, which is also something very unique, I think. 5 or 10 years ago, it was a little bit more standardized perhaps, and now there's an ability to experiment a little bit with that. So the integration of ethnographic vignettes and, really taking advantage of, as you become a PhD researcher, taking advantage of every opportunity to see the world through your field site. So the visit to Biosphere 2, which was kind of like an accident in a way. I mean, it was just an opportunity that happened at a conference, but it actually does help tell the story. And I love the from control to care is like a really powerful way to think about this. And so, yeah, I think, it's just been such a great day. And again, the mark of a PhD dissertation and defense is that you go beyond your advisor's knowledge. And so I think, just to sort of link up and recap for the day, it's like 2 amazing examples of what it looks like to go beyond the work of the advisor. So thank you.
Almost like a transition to the next portion. No, thank you very much for all of this. And we have lots of questions, I'm sure. But one thing which I did want more of a comment on is that I really appreciated how you ended with the versions of care, because I was reflecting back, obviously, and thinking about today. And I'm going to quote your research question. I have it here. How can we make futures with care through design? Mm-hmm. And in reading that, it was striking me as I was thinking about and reading your work before that there are so many interesting ways, like that sentence can be interpreted in so many interesting ways. Like, are we creating futures with care as like, are we doing it with deliberateness? Or are we caring for the futures that we are providing or planning towards? Who is the recipient of care that is being given that? And what I sort of really appreciate about what you ended with is that it's not just, we don't all have to agree on that definition, but that it's a way of thinking about care in all its dimensions, which I'm very glad in a way that you didn't resolve it, saying like, this is what I meant. This is the kind of care I meant to talk about. Because it is, I think, in those dimensions that there's a richness in how this work can be interpreted and how people can take it on. So it's more of an appreciation for, you didn't have to land the plane exactly, that it's almost nice that there's this ambiguity to it in a rich and useful way. So appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
My final story about Irem, and this is our personal stories from all this journey, was that Irene, when she came here for the first year, on the first summer, she got an offer, part of her research, and she does a great work over there, comes very excited back on her experience, and talking to the team from the company, they say, can we hire her? And I said, look, if you like her, yes, you can hire. I'm not going to be in between, and don't have control over that. But you experience what she did in just 1 year of the PhD. Do you want to hire now, or do you want to hire in the end? So that was my challenge and persuasion to let her grow, let her mature, because she's going to grow in a scale, exponential scale, much more than just 1 year after the other. So thanks for not hiring at that moment, and to let her grow the research to become something that is generalizable, is public, is available, where so many people can now benefit from that knowledge, and let this work progress to a level of maturity, and also Irene to mature now as a researcher, as a PhD with a long, long life, not only in her work, but also on the research and as an individual. So thank you for our collaborators. Thank Irene for all this journey. It has been a great pleasure. And I know that this is just the beginning of the next phase. Congratulations once again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much. Thank you. Okay. We're upstairs? Yeah.